America has always been a country defined by movement. Covered wagons, freight trains, cheap U-Hauls, and that one cousin who moved to Miami for, quote, the ladies. But over the past decade, the Great American Shuffle has started to look less like opportunity-driven migration and more like generational divorce. Young people are leaving certain states in numbers large enough that state representatives are starting to panic, local governments are pretending not to notice, and residents over 65 are just happy they finally get to drive without teenagers clogging the McDonald's parking lot. These are the 10 states where the youth exodus is real, the demographic shift is unmistakable, and the future looks bleak. Strap in, this is a long one. Number 10, Maine. If you've ever been to Maine, picture the prettiest postcard you've ever seen. Now picture it covered in snow for 6 months and owned entirely by retirees from Massachusetts. Maine is gorgeous, beyond belief. You don't need a census table to know that Maine is aging. Drive through the coastal towns in January and count how many cars you see that aren't Subarus with AARP bumper stickers. Maine has spent decades losing its young adults. In fact, it doesn't lose young people so much as it gently releases them into the world, like lobsters freed back into the ocean, except these lobsters move to Boston where they would rather pay $2,800 for a one-bedroom instead of living in Maine. Young Mainers leave for the same reasons the local moose look tired. There's just not a lot of economic variety. Maine's job market runs on tourism, fishing, small colleges, and healthcare. If you want a career in anything else, you're probably going to have to cross the state line. It's wonderful, but it's not made for young adulthood. The scariest part isn't even the population loss, it's that the few young people who remain have to carry an entire state's workforce on its shoulders. At some point, they look around and notice they're outnumbered by retirees, blueberries, and shuttered storefronts. For every 100 moves of people under 35 years old, 54.2% were moving out of Maine. Number 9, Vermont. Vermont is the kind of place where people dream of having a farm, launching a small business, or writing a book in a cabin with questionable electricity. It's serene, intellectual, and very charming. It also has a housing market that laughs in the face of anyone making less than $95,000 a year. This is a state with median age over 45, where entire towns feel like the cast of a PBS antique appraisal show.
Holy crap! Are those the 10 Commandments?
Vermont's biggest problem isn't that young people don't want to stay, it's they can't. Young adults are being priced out of the state. Every year, more people move into Vermont hoping for a peaceful rural lifestyle, and every year, a nearly equal number pack up and leave because the housing situation is a professional-grade nightmare. Young people try to make it work. They fall in love with the maple syrup, the farmers markets, and the hiking trails, but the moment they find an apartment in Burlington or Montpelier, they realize they should have majored in hedge fund management. The state's own research admits that the biggest reason people leave is housing. Plain and simple. You can have a job, a community, and a rugged Subaru, but it's hard to start your adult life if you're living in your friend's attic and sharing the space with their collection of haunted dolls. Vermont is beautiful and it's the ideal place to live for a lot of people. But like any place people want to live, it gets expensive. And in Vermont's case, a little too expensive for the people that are like under 35. For every 100 moves of people under 35, 54.7 are moving out. Number 8, New Hampshire. New Hampshire is aging faster than a gallon of milk left out in July, and nobody seems prepared for it. When you first drive through the state, it doesn't look old. It looks prosperous, clean, and full of people who know what property taxes are and are deeply angry about them. But underneath that is a demographic shift happening in real time. New Hampshire's median age is now over 45, one of the highest in the nation. You can feel it when you walk into the grocery store and notice that the average age of the people in the produce aisle is, I remember D-Day age. The wild part? New Hampshire technically does attract young adults, tons of them, but it loses a huge chunk for the exact same reason as a lot of these ones, housing. It's like the Hotel California of New England. You can check in anytime you like, but you can't ever afford to stay. A young software engineer might spend years saving for a house, only to discover they can either buy a 4-bedroom in North Carolina or a garage with a window in New Hampshire. New Hampshire's youth drain is all math. Income goes up slowly, housing goes up aggressively, property taxes sit in the corner, smoking a cigar and laughing. Eventually, young residents make the rational choice. They leave before they accidentally become a permanent renter. For every 100 moves of people under 35, 54.8 are out of New Hampshire. Number 7, Rhode Island. Rhode Island is adorable. It's tiny, it's coastal, it feels like someone shrunk Boston, added more beaches, and forgot to lower the rent. But behind the charm is a demographic issue big enough to belong to a state 10 times larger. Rhode Island is aging fast, not Maine fast, but fast enough that entire school districts have started shrinking like sweaters tossed in a dryer. Towns that once boasted bustling youth sport leagues now have trouble filling rosters. Meanwhile, retirement communities are expanding like they're trying to take over the map. The state's housing crisis is legendary. Not a single town, not one, is considered affordable for the average Rhode Island household anymore. If this state had a slogan, it would be "Welcome to Rhode Island," where the housing is as high as your cholesterol. So what do young people do? They get educated here, they get their first jobs here, and then they move somewhere, anywhere, with a lower chance of going broke by accident. The lucky ones land in Massachusetts or Connecticut. The more adventurous ones follow the modern American tradition of moving to North Carolina and telling their friends how the weather here is just better. Rhode Island isn't dying, it's just quietly turning into a retirement haven with the occasional visits from stressed out millennials trying to avoid their student loan apps. For every 100 moves of people under 35, 55.1 are moving out of Rhode Island. Number 6, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a fascinating place. It has Amish farms, it has Pittsburgh tech, it has Philadelphia sports fans, but it also has a demographic trend that should make every state planner wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. The state is old, older than you think. The median age hovers around 45, and the older adults recently surpassed children in total number. The problem isn't that Pennsylvania doesn't attract people, it does, but it doesn't attract young people at the scale they need. And the ones who grew up there leave like it's a tradition. For decades, Pennsylvania has exported young adults the way Texas exports briskets. In the mid-2010s, nearly half of the people leaving the state were between 18 and 34. That's not migration, that's evacuation. Part of the issue is the Rust Belt hangover. Towns that used to thrive on steel, coal, and manufacturing are still struggling, and younger residents see more opportunity elsewhere. Meanwhile, Pittsburgh and Philly have become magnets for older, higher-income transplants attracted to cheap housing and big city amenities. The result is a state quietly splitting in two: aging rural regions with populations older than some Florida counties, and urban centers filled with transplants who are, on average, older and wealthier than the people moving away. Pennsylvania isn't falling apart, but it's slowly being taken over by retirees and middle-aged suburbanites who think nightlife means going to Applebee's at 7. For every 100 moves of people under the age of 35, 55.5 are moving out. Number 5, Oregon. Oregon has always been cool. The trees, the coast, the mountains, Portland's weirdness. It's a state people move to when they want to reinvent themselves, grow a beard, and claim that they prefer biking for the planet, even though their car is parked 2 blocks away. But behind the vibe is an ugly reality. Oregon is aging, and young people are increasingly shrugging and heading elsewhere. The state's median age is over 45, and the number of older adults is ballooning while the number of kids and younger families are slipping. This would be normal if Oregon were cheap. It's not cheap. It's the exact opposite of cheap. It's so not cheap that the word cheap filed a restraining order on Oregon. I'm one of the people that moved up here from California because it was cheaper. And I know some people would think, well, you're part of the problem. You're coming up there from another state. No, these doors to states, they don't just swing one way. Everyone acts like if you move to Oregon from California, you're doing bad. Well, people from Oregon are moving to California, and they have been for decades. Same thing with Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, everything else. If you look at the migration patterns, almost every state that receives a lot of Californians, they sent more of their state to California. There are a few exceptions: Texas, Arizona, Nevada, Florida, Washington and Oregon, and Idaho. Now, this hasn't always been the case. Back in the 1980s and 90s, more Oregonians were moving to California than Californians moving to Oregon. It was somewhere around the early 2000s that changed. But if you look at Oregon and then you take a look at Portland, where most of the people live, it was once an affordable haven for artists, musicians, and people who loved flannel. Now it has rent prices that would make a Brooklyn landlord blush. Homelessness has risen, housing supply has cratered, and in smaller towns the same pattern appears, just with more trees and fewer weird donut shops. Young Oregonians hit their late 20s, look at their bank accounts, and realize they can't afford a 300 square foot micro loft unless they sell their copy of Milli Vanilli's All for Nothing signed album. And suddenly Boise, Spokane, and random towns in the Midwest start looking pretty good. Oregon isn't losing everyone, it's just losing the younger, broke section. You know, the one a state needs if they want a future. For every 100 moves of people under the age of 35, 56.1 are moving out. Number 4, Montana. Montana used to be a place you moved to when you wanted a simpler life. People moved there for space, for nature, and because it's one of the few places left in America where you could buy a house without auctioning off your sanity. Then the pandemic happened, remote workers arrived, and suddenly every tech worker in Seattle Googled cute Montana towns with fiber internet. Montana's population is growing, but here's the twist. It's growing old. In most of the state's counties, older adults now outnumber children. Younger Montanans, especially those growing up in rural areas, are moving out because housing went up from cheap and plentiful to hope you like living in a camper. Bozeman, once a mellow college town, now has home prices that rival West Coast metros. Missoula isn't far behind. Even smaller towns have seen price spikes so dramatic they feel like it's part of a social experiment. Meanwhile, wages, they're still Montana wages. Tourism jobs, retail jobs, service jobs, none of them keep pace with a million Californians showing up with remote worker salaries and a desire to live simply in a 3-story mountain lodge. Young adults raised in Montana face a brutal math equation. Stay and struggle or leave and maybe afford a house before the age 50. Most pick the latter. Every 100 moves under 35, 56.1 are moving out. Number 3, West Virginia. West Virginia's story is heartbreaking in a way. This is a state with life-changing scenery, rich culture, and towns that once thrived on industries now gone. But for decades, it's been losing population like there's been a gold rush everywhere but here. It's one of the few states that's shrinking almost every year. Births are down, deaths are up, and young adults, they leave like they just outlawed music and beer. The decline of coal didn't just cost jobs, it cost entire communities. Younger residents grew up watching their parents struggle or watching their towns stagnate. By the time they reached adulthood, the message was clear. Opportunity was going to require crossing a state line. And it's climbing. Schools consolidated because there's not enough kids, hospitals closed because there aren't enough workers, and whole counties now have more retirees than working-aged adults. What's left behind is a state trying to reinvent itself with tourism, remote worker incentives, and new industries. But those changes take decades, and young people who might have benefited are already off building futures in other states. For every 100 moves of people under 35, 57.5 are moving out. Number 2, Hawaii. Hawaii is stunning. Nobody disputes that. The beaches, the mountains, the sunsets, they're the kind of thing you see playing on a loop in your dentist's office waiting room. But here's what most people don't know. Hawaii is losing more local young adults than almost any state in the country. Not because they don't love their home. They love it too much. But the math is brutal. Housing is expensive, groceries are expensive, utilities are expensive, gas is expensive. You could spend $300 at a grocery store and still have to stop at McDonald's because you forgot to buy dinner food. Research shows that young Hawaiians, especially those with college degrees, are leaving at levels that would freak out any governor paying attention. Tons of Hawaiian-born millennials live in Nevada, California, Washington, and Texas. Not because they want to, because trying to build a life in Hawaii requires either 6-figure salaries, a multifamily support system, or sheer denial. The 25 to 34 population is shrinking the most, and the people leaving are overwhelmingly the ones the state needs: professionals, nurses, teachers, skilled workers. Saddest part, many want to return someday. They're just waiting for the day when rent doesn't feel like a prank. For every 100 moves of people under the age of 35, 58.3 are moving out of Hawaii. All right, before we get to number 1, if you're living in one of these states and you need a new state, there's a link for a website called Home and Money in the description area. They can get you in touch with a real estate agent anywhere in the country. Go take a look. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Florida. Florida is the grand finale because Florida is the most extreme version of what all these states are experiencing. Everybody knows people moved to Florida. Beaches, the theme parks, the tax situation. You could do worse. But here's the twist. Florida's rapid growth is being driven by retirees and older adults, not younger workers. While the state as a whole grows, younger Floridians are quietly slipping out the back door. Surveys show Nearly half the population has considered leaving the state because the cost of living has exploded in recent years. Rents doubled in some places, homeowners insurance is high enough to make billionaires sweat, and wages simply don't match the new economy. The number of young people leaving Florida has surged. Many of them are college-educated workers who want a future that doesn't involve being priced out of the state, built around beachfront real estate and HOA fees that could fund a small army. Walk through certain Florida neighborhoods and the demographic divide becomes obvious. On one side, retirees living their best Jimmy Buffett life. On the other, young adults splitting a 2-bedroom apartment 6 ways. Florida is slowly becoming a paradise for the old, a challenge for the middle-aged, and a launching pad for the young. For every 100 moves of people under the age of 35, 58.5 are moving out of Florida. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a great day, be nice to each other.